So, okay, we're going to get started. I'm going to talk about a few different things in relation to nutrients, nutrient management, and pathogens today. And if you have questions as I go along, go ahead and ask them. I don't mind, because sometimes in perspective it makes more sense then. If I think I'm going to get to it, I'll tell you that we're going to wait a minute before we get to it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. One of the things we need to know when we're dealing with nutrient management is, you know, what do we care about manure PAN? And when I mean PAN, it's not a pan that you're putting your oil into, but plant available nitrogen. How much of whatever you're applying, be it a liquid manure or solid phase, is plant available? Because what you put on, not 100% of it is plant available, some smaller portion of this. And some of the reasons why you want to know more about your plant available nitrogen is how much are you actually paying yourself for a fertilizer? If you're organic or your manure is going to an organic program, this is important to know how much nutrients you're putting on. Mentioned earlier, environmental concerns. If you're using precision manure application equipment, that surprisingly, even people may think when we're talking about precision manure, we're putting on manure. There are places now that are using GPSs to put on manure in other type of ways, so it's closer than you think. You may need to know this for equip funding, or also if you're looking at other nutrients, because manure is usually put on a nitrogen balance standpoint, so you need to also may want to look at P values, what your P amount is doing. So when it comes to nitrogen, because that's generally how manure applications are determined, we have the nitrogen cycle, and it has various places to play. Because we have crop uptake, which is where the nitrogen is used, and we have various pools of where nitrogen comes from. We have the cow, and it comes from there, and it comes from the organic nitrogen. So cows, you get ammonia nitrogen, you get organic nitrogen. Ammonia nitrogen is immediately available to plants, so crops can take that up. There's also nitrate nitrogen, which you would get from soils from mineralization of organic matter. It would turn to nitrate in your soil, go from ammonia to nitrate, and crop uptake. Crops can use ammonia or nitrate depending on how things are going. Organic nitrogen, you need to go through mineralization and from cows to the soil, then to ammonia nitrogen, and then through crop uptake. And if you're over applying, you may get leaching loss to groundwater, which we're trying to avoid, or denitrification, or loss of N2O into the atmosphere. So it's sort of complicated, but what you really want to take home from this is you have plant uptake of ammoniums. Ammonium is used for plant uptake, and organic nitrogen through mineralization will be used for plant uptake. Nitrate is sort of an indicator of how well you're doing in this case. So we have pools of nitrogen in the soil. We have a number of different pools. We have the stable soil nitrogen, which is inherently comes from your long-term organic matter. So you have different soil types, you have different amount of organic matter in it, and that's a much more stable pool, much less available, but it is also the largest part of nitrogen in the soil. Then you have your active soil land, which is what you're going to just apply, and then what we call the living or crop dead or crop residues, things that are recently plowed under, and these two are lesser than the other one, but this probably takes the active soil land is where most of the action comes from plant availability. So one thing to remember when you're applying organic material, be it a liquid manure, be it a solid manure, be it a compost, be it whatever kind of organic material you have, it's a great bank account. Okay? You put on manure the first year, part of it's available, part of it is unavailable. And then in the second year, you put on some more. But then material you put on the previous year, you get a little bit of that back in the second year, so it becomes additives, and you get what you apply this year, plus some from next year. And if you go to the third year, you're putting on more manure, and you get some from this year, some from last year, some from the year before that, onward and upward, that eventually your bank is full and you're getting nothing but interest, and you have more nitrogen than you're getting, and you may or may not need any. So you really need to pay attention to how this sort of works and credit yourself for some previous year's applications. Okay, so calendar of end-use efficiency. There's certainly different times of the year when you're growing crops that the nitrogen is used more efficiently depending on the crop you're growing. So I have different times of the year, and then either a corn or a grass crop, as to when the crop really needs and can use the material. You can see with the grass, we start early in the spring and there's a high demand through the first part of the year, and then less or so later in the year. But with corn, we start out with just needing a little earlier in the year, and then during the growing phase in April, June, there's a high demand, a little less in July, and by the time we get to August, things are maturing. So there's a low demand for nitrogen, low efficiency for using nitrogen then, and then September through February is even lower because September, October, you've been out there and cut the corn crop off, and if there's no corn crop, efficiency is zero, so any nutrients out there are definitely not being used, unless, of course, in this case, if you're using a cover crop to sort of catch that late season nitrogen that might become available. So you can see here the really take-home message is that grass actually has a much longer season for high nutrient efficiency than corn does. Okay, so the way that I recommend for a lot of people to evaluate how they're doing on the nutrient management program is through a post-harvest soil nitrate sampling. And this tells you about how much plant available nitrogen is present in the surface foot of your soil, and it can help you identify imbalances of N supply on fields. And this is from Extension Bulletin EB8832. This one happens to be out of Oregon, but it's a fellow I work on with Oregon, and we do a lot of bulletins together. So how do you sample? When you sample this, you go out and get a representative of your sample of your field. It's a 0 to 12 inch soil sample, 15 to 30 sub-samples per field. And you want to do this as soon as possible after the crop is harvested. And you want to take samples prior to any heavy rains in the fall. I'm going to talk a little bit more about important dates to keep in mind with that as we go along. Okay, so sample timing. You can look at many different fields, fine textured soils, loam clays, they all can work with it. But you want to have soil samples taken prior to 5 inches of cumulative rainfall, which starts about October 15th. And then for sandy textured soil, sandy loam, sand or other sands, prior to 3 inches of the fall by October 1st. So you want to, there's sort of this window that you want to try to get things done by, which is really important. Otherwise, what happens is after you get these kind of rains, you start to get leaching going on in your field, and the number is inaccurate, and it won't be nearly as a good number to use, potential to help you manage stuff. Interpretation of the soil results. This is sort of really important because depending what lab we'll use will depend on what you're dealing with. So I've got a little math here, and it's either measured in parts per million or milligrams per kilogram. Some labs will give you, if you want pounds per acre, there's this multiplier by somewhere between 3 and 4. Like here we have a 20 part per million number, that's 3.5, gives you 70 pounds of N in the per acre. Usually for this we look at parts per million or milligrams per kilogram. And my recommendation, if this is the numbers you want, request this of your lab. That's what you want the units in, and they should provide it to you. Because let them do the work. You're giving them money for the analysis anyhow. Okay, so interpretation of these for corn silage. What we're looking at is we have this. If you have a number of 20 parts per million, continue your management practice as is. You're doing a great job. Buy yourself a beer if you're a beer drinker and congratulate yourself. Okay? If you're in the 20 to 45 range, you want to use something called a pre-sidedress nitrate test, which is a soil test when it's about yay big, and you come through and take a soil test, tells you how much nitrate is left in your soil, help you indicate if you need more nitrogen, and you should only apply when this test indicates that you need more, and the next year you may want to reduce somewhere between 10 and 25% of your nitrogen application. This is, of course, there are other mitigating factors that go into this because it's a biological system. Let's say you have a crop that's a little weak and you're not getting the kind of yields that you normally might get out of it at the end of the year, then that would change how much you might want to change it. If you're getting a bad year, you're not getting the corn growth, not going to be using nitrogen, and you will have already sort of applied nitrogen in anticipation of getting a full crop, so that would explain why your numbers might be a little a little high. If you're greater than 45 parts per million, definitely reduce applications by 25 to 40%, and no manure or water applications after October 1st. Manure, water, not manure and water, but manure, water. Because you may need to put water on after October 1st. Because that goes back to that slide where I talked about new nitrogen efficiency for corn. After, in August, nitrogen efficiency use goes way down, which is why you want to reduce that if you have a number up by 45. Okay, so interpretation for grass silage. 15 parts per million, continued management practices, you're doing a good job. Grass is a lot more efficient at using nitrogen than the corn is, so the number is different a little bit, they're a little more conservative. If you're between 15 and 30 parts per million, apply manure earlier in the year, reduce by 10 to 25%. If you're greater than 30, then you want to reduce by 25 to 40 and keep manure early on in the season prior to August 1st. Generally, the more the sooner you can get, if you go back to the slide we have with the different use efficiency, you can get your nutrients applied during the times of high efficiency, you're going to become a better manager and you'll be able to better manage, better balance out what you're applying. Okay, so that's sort of the first piece of what I'm talking about. Any questions so far, or are we all asleep because we've now had lunch and a nice drink and a nice piece of candy? Okay, I'm just wondering on to the next thing. I'm going to talk about, this one is a different bulletin, 8954. It's estimating plant available nitrogen from manure, sort of a system on how to deal with some of these calculations. There's a number of methods out there. There's a worksheet. I want to go through these all up. There you go. It's a worksheet that can be used to determine manure application rate needed if you know what target plant available nitrogen that you're shooting for in your crop. You can also use to estimate the dollar value of plant available nitrogen from manure. Also, it will estimate the N saved by immediate tillage or direct application, sort of an efficiency factor for how you apply it. Also, it will help you balance out how much NP and K you supplied by manure, and also get a long-term estimate of 10-year plant available nitrogen from manure. Okay, so there are certain things you need to know when you're using this. There's sort of a number of things you get from a soil test. Total nitrogen or TKN number, ammonium nitrogen or NH4-N, using the same phosphorus, potash, and then how much manure, dry matter or total solids that's going to be in your manure, be it liquid or solid, because even liquids have some solid phase to it. You need to account for that piece. Okay, this is sort of what it looks like, and you just sort of go through and you can put in what you're using. It's a wet manure measured in 1,000 gallons of slurry or acre inches, depending on what you want to do. And then it has, you just enter your numbers and you work down through it. So it will calculate from those numbers. This is wanting to know how much is applied. In this case, 20,000 gallons. And it helps you if you have the number of what the fertilizer costs. It'll help you calculate sort of a cost value that's associated with the nutrients that you're putting on. So you can congratulate yourself that you're saving some money because you're not buying fertilizer. And then it'll also estimate the availability from the ammonium and the organic end from not only the first year, but also from the next several years, from 2 to 10 years down the road, and give you a P and K number off the manure. Here's just an example with plant availability from ammonium is 66, and then plant evaluation fraction from 32 from this year's manure application, and then it also gives you a number, if you have the numbers long enough, how much from previous year's application, and give you how much total you will get for the year, and then this one will you would compare to how much N that you're looking to have available for your crop, be it grass, corn, berries, whatever. Okay, and usually it talks about value being retained in the amount of plant availability. This just looks at the total amount of N applied 200 which you get about 98 pounds of plant available, 50 pounds of 50 cents per pound of N value. So you got about $49 of N there in the manure that you're putting on. Okay, so this sort of goes to how the application works. Depending on the type of application you're using, a big gun, tilling it into the field, will give you sort of a little different number. This just sort of shows you a couple of different methods that you can use on grass, is to wear a broadcast on the surface with a splash plate or a big gun, or a band spreading in the field, or just sort of slipping it in right under the soil a little bit. Okay, and this tells you the amount of ammonium retained, because that's really the important one when it comes to how you're applying it, what the efficiency is how much ammonium that you're going to retain. You can see, like, if you're applying it to corn ground and you're running a tiller right behind it, you retain 95% of it, where if it's 7 days or after, you're only retaining about 55% of it. So there's a whole range of how much you can take here, depending on how you do it, how you account for it. And this just sort of looks at the cumulative plant available nitrogen for different types of manure over a number of years. We have this top number, which is a thin slurry. You can see that after you've applied this for a number of years, it starts to come up, a thick slurry, and then compost it is a little less just because of the amount of nitrogen, the type of nitrogen in compost or separated dairy solids. The availability is different because it has less ammonium, has more organic matter in it. Okay. Any questions? Okay. We're asleep. Okay, so we're going to break down into a little bit into pathogens now and foodborne diseases. More and more, when you're using, I'm going to deal with foodborne diseases from a manure standpoint, not from a milk standpoint. Because I'm a soil scientist and I deal with sort of the waste side of life, because there's a whole bunch of other things that goes with the milk side of life. But I'm going to talk about manure pathogens and foodborne illnesses. Total foodborne illnesses per year in the United States is 76 million. Hospitalizations, about 325,000, about 5,000 deaths. But certainly not all from manure. A lot of these are from on produce, where we have most common pathogens for foodborne diseases. E. coli 15787, you hear about that one in the news. Norovirus, probably heard about this one. This is the one that they worry about on cruise ships. It's not really from the manure. Or salmonella, E. coli 15787, the salmonella you find in manure. Norovirus, not so much. Okay, the good thing about it is on foods, just to sort of give you a good feeling about it, is the low pathogen presence on most foods, which means we're doing a really good job of producing foods in the United States. And we have less pathogens on domestically produced foods and a little bit more on imported foods, but still very, very, very low. But you still want to try to figure out if you're dealing with manure as either on your own farm and raising vegetables, or if you're selling this or giving it away to a neighbor who's raising vegetables, pathogen tracking is going to be very, very important. There's a huge amount of different pathogens you find that can cause a problem in manure to humans. A number of the bacteria are carried on various hosts, don't cause the host any problems, but they will cause humans problems. So they could be carried in a cow in their manure. Doesn't really affect the cow, but it's going to affect the human. Okay. Land application of dairy manure poses risk to both humans and grazing animals as pathogens fly. Can be known to survive for a long time in the soil. It's not like you apply manure to the field, pathogens, and they die right off. Here's just some summarized data from various places where pathogens, supplies survive. We have different pathogens and how long they last in either slurry, fecal patties, soil and water. You can say, well, look at salmonella. You know, it's out there for a number of days, long time in slurry or in the soil. So it's not something that you apply and immediately goes away. It takes time for these to die off. Okay? When we look at pathogens and we're measuring things, we don't actually measure the pathogen. We usually use indicators. In fecal coliforms, generic E. coli would be some of the different indicators we use to measure E. coli, because they're generally found in higher numbers in the field, where like E. coli 0157, you find very small amounts in the field, and it only takes somewhere between 1 and 10 cells of E. coli 0157 H7 to make you sick, but they're found in very low amounts in the field, and that's one of the reasons why we use indicator organisms. Here's sort of the whole sort of slow, farm interface with pathogens. You have a waste storage, you have slope, you have runoff, we have soil bacteria. Factors that affect sort of the pathogen realm of this would be soil type, water content, water table, vegetative cover, utility is it this time of the year versus March versus July or August when things are dry, what kind of runout you're having, how much solar radiation you have. So there's a lot of factors that go into into why these are so a little bit complicated, but still important to look at. There's been doing some work with AD, anaerobic digestion, around. There's some up here, there's some further south, and one of the benefits from using anaerobic digestion is you can get lower amounts. Looking at this case is generic E. coli, the blue line's pre-anaerobic digestion, the green line is post-anaerobic digestion, and you can see that once you anaerobic digest, your values are lower. And we have a number of things here. Here we're looking at Enterococcus, another pathogen you find. Again, the red is the pre, the purple is post, and they're a little bit lower, not quite as the same as the other one. But here's a great chart, shows you many things to show where pathogens exist or don't exist with different pathogens. And really what the take home is that most of the time, this section here is the pre-AD, these are post-AD, and you can see here that the post-AD is much lower than a number of the places where you find things up here. You don't get pathogens for everything. We've sort of broken things down into like every thing here, but we have feces and farm flow, but where the bedding, if you're using a wood product, is coming in pretty low. Feedstocks generally don't have come in with pathogens. So there's a number of things here, but generally through AD you get a reduction in pathogen, which is one of the advantages to coming. One of the nice things here, they're making compost, and if you're doing composting correctly, you can get a really big reduction in plant pathogens. You don't get elimination, but you do get a reduction. This just sort of shows, I got a number of slides here that sort of show applying the manure the application equipment we use to apply the manure with in this next study. There's a graduate student who was working on that project. And here's some of the data we have. This is looking at fecal bacteria, so not an actual pathogen, but an indicator. And again, we have pre and post AD. So the higher numbers here would be pre-AD, and then the white lines here are post-AD. So through anaerobic digestion, you get a reduction in pathogens. Same thing there. Take-home message is that manure used off-farm for crop production, you got to really pay attention to your pathogens if it's going to vegetable or fruit growers, because with the new FSMA guidelines, manure management in relation to pathogens, not only in materials from manure, but in water and other things, they're really going to come down. How you manage these is going to become much more critical and will require a lot more record keeping. Okay, so untreated animal waste may be a source of pathogens. Proper composting can reduce the risk for transmitting pathogens via manure. Absolute safety from compost manure is impossible to demonstrate. Okay, you can't test every piece of manure out there as you're applying. That's why we use indicator organisms to help that, or methods to reduce pathogens, such as composting. Good planning, monitoring, record keeping is essential to demonstrate reasonable cautions are taken when handling these materials. Okay, I think that's the, yep, that's the last slide.